Well, hello everybody, and welcome to a conversation with Cesar Conde, who is the chairman of NBCUniversal News Group. I've been looking forward to this all week for two reasons. Firstly, my name's Gillian Tett. I'm with the Financial Times, which makes me a paid-up news junkie. I love watching television, I love reading news, as I'm sure, I hope, most of you in the room do too. But secondly, before I became a journalist, I was trained as an anthropologist, and so I'm also fascinated by tribalism. And tribalism is afoot in a big way today, not just in the political sphere, but also in the media sphere. And Cesar has a fascinating perspective on this, because you are head of NBC News Universal. You have been working in television as a media executive for many, many years. You initially were working with Univision and Telemundo and groups like that. You're the first Hispanic head of a major English-speaking media group. Yep, exactly. Cheers.
Thank you, Mom. No. No, I know. Thank you.
Which is breaking down tribalism already. But you've had a perspective on the media for many, many years, and there's a lot of things I want to ask you. But before we do that, I want to start by asking you all to vote with your hands on a few key questions that I want to ask Cesar. And it's to do with the state of the media today. Hands up those of you who are old enough to have seen Walter Cronkite on television. Okay, right demographic. Hands up those of you who think that television has deteriorated since the days of Walter Cronkite. Okay. Hands up those of you who think that television is making the problem of polarization in the media worse today. Okay, pretty much all of you. Hands up those of you who trust what is on television today. Okay, about 3 of you. And lastly, who watches NBC television most days?
There you go.
Great, okay? That was a good news bit, okay? Does that surprise you?
No, none of it does. First of all, thank you, Gillian. It's great to see you. Thanks for the invitation. Thanks to the Aspen Institute. I'm so excited to be back in Aspen. It reminds us when we get back here what a special place this is. But no, to answer your question, none of that surprises us. We are in this every day, and there's some fundamental challenges in our country, around the world, and certainly in the news industry, and I'm sure we'll get into it. And we have seen all of these dynamics. One of the things that I constantly remind folks is the vital importance of a strong, independent, and trusted news media is fundamental to the health of our democracy. And so, when we talk about these issues, this is not a challenge just for the media industry or the journalism profession. It's a challenge for our society. So I'm glad we're talking about it.
So a lot of people today would say, well, you've got these different channels. It ain't Walter Cronkite anymore. Fox is right-wing. NBC is left-wing, and that's never going to change. You are never going to get a balanced, overarching, bipartisan view from NBC. What would you say to that?
Yeah, so I'd disagree with the premise of the question or the comment. First is, we're a very different news organization than many of our peers out there. We're the largest news organization in the country, and because we are a large, diversified portfolio. And so as a little bit of context, the NBCUniversal News Group, we have NBC News, which is all of the programs like NBC Nightly News with Lester Holt, like the Today Show with Savannah Guthrie and the like. These are shows that we do through the lens of hard news, breaking news, with no perspective or anything like that. We also have Telemundo News, right? So this is the same as NBC News, but in Spanish, super serving an important demographic and important community in our country. We also have CNBC, the leaders in covering business and covering the markets, and so we super serve that audience. We have all of these emerging platforms and streaming and the like. We also have MSNBC. MSNBC is a little bit more of a bifurcated model. During the day, we have hard breaking news, but in the morning and in the evening, we have perspective, we have analysis and the like from people from many different walks of life who provide insight, an analysis on the news that happened that day. And I always give the example of MSNBC's approach, almost the traditional publishing model that we're all familiar with from the old days. You know, when you open up the New York Times or the Wall Street Journal or the FT, on the front page, you have the hard news, you know, you get the facts, what happened the day before. When you turn to the back and you turn to the editorial pages, you know that that's perspective, that's opinion of the individual that's writing that. That is the same model that we have at MSNBC. So the premise of your question is we offer a variety of different things. We think it's important to have that variety for our audiences because it's serving different purposes for different audiences.
But do you really think that you can try and take a bipartisan approach and try and be everything to everybody in a world where actually commercially all the pressure on channels today is to get sticky audiences, to basically to play into the tribalism, to make sure your tribe loves you and goes to you first, and to basically serve them? I mean, being, you know, fair, balanced, something to everybody simply probably doesn't sell in today's America.
Well, I think in our particular case, we take the public service piece of our news business. We're a large diversified media company that has a lot of differences, but the news part is the only part that has that dual objective. Yes, we're a business. We make money, and that's what allows us to invest resources into doing the journalism that we do, not here only in the United States, but around the world. But the second element of that is the public service component, and we take that extraordinarily seriously. But I think there's another element to the discussion, which is I think we also have to fast forward to the year 2020. We've had a proliferation of places and platforms where people can get their news. And the reality is all of these traditional television outlets that we're talking about, they are the minority of the place where people are getting their news information today. The reality is most people get their news information in the social media ecosystem. And that is a real challenge because there are so many places that are now offering information that are not the news organizations that we are familiar with, that have the rigors, the standards, the processes that are very important to ensure that we're putting out accurate information. And that's a real dynamic that's out there in the marketplace right now.
But if, in essence, you're facing a much more competitive landscape than the days of Walter Cronkite, where basically people can choose whatever they want, it's all customization, everything is customized, surely the pressure on you is to shriek louder and louder to grab the eyeballs and to make sure that your tribe becomes more addicted to watching you by being more tribal.
I think when you're talking about the technology platforms and the social media, the algorithms that are out there, yes, they feed in, they reinforce what individuals are choosing to watch on their devices. I can tell you from our particular case, that's not the approach that we take. The outlets that we have of hard news, of breaking news, are right down the middle. That is the objective that we give our analysts our journalists, when they're doing it from the NBC News perspective. On CNBC, we look at it through the lens of what is occurring in the markets, how is this affecting business and the like. When we offer perspective on a place like MSNBC, yes, there is perspective and analysis based on journalism, based on the news of the day, but yes, that is perspective. But it's important, it's equally as important, I think, Gillian, for audiences to know when they're consuming, what is it that they're consuming. Sometimes people consume perspective and analysis, and they say, how can this be news? How can this be objective? Well, it's not. It's the perspective of someone. But when they are consuming news and hard news, what we hope is that's what they're getting. They're getting the facts and what happened in an objective, a nonpartisan manner.
So do you feel at all responsible or any guilt about the growing polarization in the political world? Because, you know, a lot of people would say it's all the media's fault. They don't often say that about the Financial Times because I have a posh British accent, but you know, they would certainly blame television and say, you look at the picture on the TV, you see all this polarization on television, and that's adding to the sense of polarization in America. Do you feel guilty?
I think there are so many. The media is certainly a part of what's happening in the country right now. It is certainly not the only piece. There is polarization in many aspects of our society right now. I think there's different aspects that are contributing. Having said that, we do believe very strongly that we need to be a positive voice, a positive force in that discussion. And there's many, many things that we're doing that I'm happy to get into.
Right. We'll come back to the moment, but let's get back to the other core point you made earlier about the growing competitiveness of the landscape. And on top of the fact you have an explosion of social media sources, alternative sources that people can customize into their own tribal platform identities, you've also got a world where you're getting growing unbundling, and that is putting increased commercial pressure on groups like yourselves. How are you going to fight back on a revenue side with the whole tendency to cut the cord, the unbundling? How can you possibly keep up your revenues in a way that's going to allow you to do the kind of things you're talking about?
Sure. Look, this is one of the fundamental questions facing the media industry overall. And so clearly we have seen transformational change in many industries around the world because of changing technology and changing consumer habits. The media, of course, has been one of those. On one level, it has created a tremendous amount of opportunity for us. Why? Because now we have so many more ways to engage, to have touch points, to have direct relationships with our audiences and with our consumers. Those are things that we could never do before. And so that's extraordinarily valuable to, I think, to our audiences, but it's also extraordinarily valuable to us. And so the emergence of all these new platforms, that's created some real opportunity. In the same breath, it's also created a much more competitive landscape, right? So audiences, consumers are being inundated with choices, with content at all times of the day, you know, in every place that they're at. And so for us, what requires is we have to ensure that the product, in our case, premium content that we're putting out in the marketplace is the very best, so we break through the clutter. What we are competing for is the attention of our consumers. So as far as changing consumption habits, look, that has been changing for a decade in the media industry since the advent.
I mean, young people. I mean, there aren't many young people in the room here, but you know, the people who aren't in the room, they don't watch you.
Yeah, no. Well, but let me be clear. They don't watch traditional linear TV, but they are watching premium video. They're just watching it in different places. So one of the stats that people usually point to is they say, oh, linear television is getting, or live linear television is getting less and less viewing. That is true. It's a huge, huge audience that's slowly coming down every year. But what's also important to point out is that that's different than the consumption of premium video. Premium video is, there's more hours of premium video being watched today than there were before. The difference is they're being watched in different places. So the place where consumption is exploding is in streaming, right? That's something that's not new to any of us. We've seen that trend build over the last 10 years, but particularly we saw that trend build with the advent of Netflix, and particularly with entertainment and general interest streaming platforms. So over the years, we've seen Netflix, obviously, but now we have Disney Plus and HBO Max and Hulu and Apple TV, and of course Peacock, which is our streaming platform at NBCUniversal. That is on the entertainment side. Those habits have been formed. When it comes to streaming news in the ecosystem, those habits only started to be formed over the last few years. And so that's why, in our particular case, we moved very aggressively over the last 2 years to invest in building a news streaming platform, because we wanted to be able to build and get audiences that were different than our traditional linear audiences. Fast forward to today, our service is called NBC News Now. It is for all practical purposes, it's like a 24-hour cable news service, except we distribute it via streaming. You can get it on an app. You can get it on any of the free streaming services. You can get it on Roku. You can get it on Samsung, any of the smart TVs. Why is this important? We've been able to offer a service made through the lens of NBC News. So there's no perspective, there's no analysis. It's just hard breaking news, just the facts. And what is the type of audience we've been able to attract? Younger audiences, right? And when I say younger audiences, the average age of what cable and broadcast TV networks get today, all of them, not just us, any of the major ones, is a little over the age of 61 or 62, right? When it comes to us launching our streaming platform, our average age is 35 to 40-year-olds. So it's 35 to 40-year-olds, it's individuals who are cord nevers or cord cutters. In other words, people who are not subscribing to cable service or satellite service as we may all have done growing up. So up until now, it has been a net positive add to our ecosystem. And the good news is that consumption is growing exponentially, not only for us, but in the overall news streaming service.
Right. Of course, one of the downsides of that is streaming enables you to do more of a kind of pick and mix approach to it. It's more customization. I often think this generation should be called Generation P, as in Generation Pick and Mix, which of course simply reinforces the tribalism and the sense of living in echo chambers and things, which makes it worse. But I'm curious, what about the Hispanic market? I mean, you know, you are in this unique position of breaking boundaries here. Do you think there's a way to integrate the Hispanic market more into the English-speaking market, or is that just another area of tribalism? And how has your experience in dealing with the Hispanic market influenced what you're doing in the English language market now?
Sure. Well, maybe I'll give a little bit of context, but the short answer to your question, it's my experience with working with the Hispanic community has been extraordinarily valuable. One, because it is the demographic that's fueling all of the demographic growth here in the United States. It skews younger, it's much more digital native. We used to dub this generation, Generation M. It's millennial, it's mobile, and it's multicultural. And so understanding its habits over the years has allowed me to apply that, I think, at an earlier stage in this NBCU News Group role.
So Generation M meets Generation P.
That's right. You know, as far as context on the Hispanic community here in the United States, a few things. One is the last census that just closed for 2020 showed us a milestone here in the United States. For the first time in our country, the United States became majority minority for people under the age of 18. And so that means that the majority, there was 50+% of people under the age of 18 in the United States are people of color. Fast forward, that will be the trend for the overall population of the United States by the year 2040. That's for all people of color. The Hispanic community today is somewhere in the 17 to 18% rate. It is the demographic, as I said, that's driving all of the demographic growth in the country, certainly over the last decade, and it will until the next decade. But that 17 to 18% is a national number. If you go to some major markets around the United States, you know, the Floridas, the Californias, the New Yorks, the Texas, Illinois, and the like, and then certain cities within those, the Hispanic community is 50+% of some of those cities today. And so that is having social, cultural, economic, and of course political ramifications around the country. And so the answer to your question is, how do you integrate that? It is part of the mainstream today. When I was at Telemundo, we were able to have so much success because we made one fundamental change in our strategy. We decided to start creating content for what we call the 200 percenters. The 200 percenters are those individuals that feel and are 100% American and 100% Hispanic. They walk in two worlds. And so, yes, they're able to watch the World Cup soccer, but they're also able to watch NFL and so on and so forth. And so ensuring that we have that we're speaking to the issues that matter to these communities that are now part of the mainstream is one of the ways that we're doing. But of course, we also collaborate with Telemundo and on specific content and the like that speaks to this community.
So if you fast forward 5 years, 10 years, what do you think it's going to look like, your world? Will it be primarily streaming? Will we all be living in our own sort of pick-and-mix matrix-like universe where we all choose what we want and download it on our phones and define our own version of reality? Do you think there's going to be a multiplicity of players? Would you expect more consolidation in the industry? What do you think it's going to be like?
Look, I think in the overall, I'll talk first about the news ecosystem, and then I can comment if you'd like broadly. I think in the news arena, we are going to continue to see more competition come out. As we have more platforms, as we have more places, you're going to see more outlets try to speak to them. Our focus is going to continue to be to put out the type of journalism that we create with the standards and the rigor that we have, as many other great news organizations do, FT and so many others. We just need the quality of that content is the core of what we do. Then we need to figure out the distribution platforms. People are going to be consuming in a lot of different ways in the future. And so we have to pivot and make sure we distribute and get that content to them whenever, however, and on the place, in the devices that they want. But at the core of what we do, we have to continue to offer right. that premium journalism.
So is there anything that you think you've got wrong in the last year?
Oh gosh, I think there's a lot that we constantly get wrong. In our business, our fundamental focus is to ensure that we are laser focused on facts, ensure that we are laser focused on accuracy. But with that mission, also, it's important to recognize that when we make an error, we recognize it, we correct it right away, and we move on. I think the second thing is we're living in an era of proliferation of misinformation and disinformation. And this has become one of the most important areas that we have to focus on as a journalism profession and industry. Facts matter. Differentiating facts from fiction is fundamental. And so ensuring that none of that creeps into any of the reporting we do is fundamental. I'll give you an example. During the early stages of the war of Ukraine, the early days as the war was unfolding, we were beginning to get a lot of footage and the like that was coming from on the ground about the military incursion and so on and so forth. We have a unit that we have set up in the past that vets anything that we get in from social media for accuracy and the like. At the beginning, the overwhelming amount of the video and the footage that we were getting was not real or was
fake.
It was fake, and so it was fundamental for us to go through that process to make sure that that wasn't creeping into it. One of the names that we've dubbed with some of the dynamics that we're dealing with misinformation and disinformation is we've dubbed this counterfeit news. And
counterfeit news.
Counterfeit news, and this is.
Is that because it sounds a bit more polite than fake news?
No, I'll tell you why. It's like.
Also, I can't imagine Donald Trump tweeting about the counterfeit media. Fake news is a lot easier to tweet.
But there's a unique thing to this, and this is why I think the phrase is helpful. It's information that is created to look like it's real, but it has the very specific intent to deceive. And so, like counterfeit bills, if you hold it up to the light, if you scrutinize it, you can see that it's not real. And so that is a real dynamic. And what do we do about it? What we've tried to do is a variety of things. We've looked at it through the lens of our coverage. Is we've invested resources in people and technology and journalists and the like to make sure that we're helping our audiences understand what may be going on a topic like this, so that they understand to read things in a critical way and not be misinformed or misled. We have to ensure that that's a big part of our responsibility.
So what are you going to do in 2024 on election night when suddenly one party declares victory or one state declares victory and you're not sure you can believe it? Have you had any conversations about that? How on earth you're going to cover the elections in a way that doesn't leave you subject to more counterfeit news?
So
I'm looking forward to the day that Donald Trump tweets out counterfeit media.
So I will tell you, I'll answer the question by telling you in the 2020 cycle, we made the proactive decision that it was important for us not to be first in reporting who won, but to be right, who won the election. And I think for a variety of reasons that's important. And that is a very different approach than I think the overall news industry had approached it in the past. But for the day and age that we're in, we think that accuracy is much more important than being first. And so that's the first comment. The second comment is this is all based on data. And we will, as we always have, we have an incredible set of data scientists that go through the information, and we will not make a decision until we believe that we are reading the accurate information and that it is reliable and that we have an election. If we don't feel comfortable, we won't be calling any elections.
Are you going to try and have a treaty with the other major broadcasters to agree on a policy on that? I mean, because there could be a reason for you, Fox, CNN, to come together and say we are collectively going to support each other and hold the line here.
Each of the news organizations are looking at the same data that's coming out, but each of them, and we respect, have different approaches. We will continue to have the rigor and the approach that we have at NBC.
Have you spoken to your counterparts at Fox about this?
I have not spoken to them about this.
Right. I'm going to turn to the audience for questions in just one moment. Before I do, though, one other quick question I'd love to ask you, which is, why is Rachel Maddow going?
Well, the first is Rachel Maddow's not going. Rachel Maddow's with us for many, many years. We're very excited.
Those of you who didn't see the news, or the news about the news, is that she is stepping down or has been moved on from her nightly program into fresh pastures.
So Rachel has signed on for another multi-year partnership with us at NBCUniversal, and this is a great example of what we think is a win-win for everyone. Rachel is going to continue being on MSNBC, but instead of being daily, it'll be once a week, and it frees her up, and it's a great case study in sort of this proliferation of platforms. It frees up someone who has an incredible following to now do, yes, live cable TV, but it also allows her now to do podcasts. It allows her to now do programs for us on our streaming platform. It allows her to work on documentaries and longer form series, which we think is extraordinarily important because we have so many more touch points. And in her replacement, we named yesterday Alex Wagner, who's an incredible journalist and analyst, and we're just very lucky to have Alex, Rachel, and we think it's a win for them, we think it's a win for us, and we think it's a win for our audience.
So if Walter Cronkite was around today, he wouldn't be doing a nightly show, he'd be doing TikTok, streaming, podcasts, everything else as well. Is that what you're saying?
I think Walter Cronkite would certainly be on a variety of platforms, not just one.
What a pity. He's not here today. Right, any questions? We've got a question in front. As ever, it would be courteous but not compulsory to identify yourself, and please keep your questions short.
Hi, my name is Julie Linhart. As a former local television news producer in Charleston, South Carolina, and Washington, D.C., I have a question about local news.
Yes.
Because in the world we live in, the polarization and the mistrust, one element is local anchors and reporters are trusted. And people do, on a very basic level, want to know what's going on in their communities. And I do think that is something that could probably heal some of the polarization in this country because it's a local community thing. So where does that play into your whole process?
I realize one of the other questions I should have asked the audience to vote on is how many of you are in or have worked in the media? We're probably talking to, yeah, exactly, quite a lot of you. So you're talking to your own here. You're in your own tribe.
So it's a fundamental piece of what we're doing. I think there's one broader, it's part of a broader sort of a theme. We believe that one of the things that we can do to begin to rebuild some of the trust with our audiences is we have to ensure that our newsrooms represent all of the communities that we serve. And that means everything from gender to ethnicity and race, to diversity of geographic background, diversity of socioeconomic background, diversity of perspective, and diversity of experience. And it is something that we've been very proactive on our front. One example is 2 years ago, we announced the 50% challenge, which we were very open about. We came out and we said that our aspiration is for 50% of our NBCUniversal News Group employees to be women and 50% to be people of color. This is based on data. It's based on the census. We want to be representative of all the communities we serve. But this also means that we want to make sure that we have representation from all parts of the country. One of the things, and Gillian talks, I'll paraphrase, but you talk about some of this, or you allude to some of this in your book. If our newsrooms don't have journalists who have different experiences or live in different parts of the country, it is very difficult for them to authentically talk about what is happening or what may be resonating with different audiences. And so to your example of local news, we have begun to hire people from a variety of different places, not just to work, obviously in our local stations around the country, all of those are local individuals. But in our national platforms, we've started to hire people from places that are not based in New York and in DC. Because by accident, I think people have, who live in just New York or DC, have a very close perspective as to what's happening. It's no one's fault, but if you're walking around and you're in your circle and you go to eat in certain places and you commute in a certain way, those are the issues that matter to you. But those are very different issues to people that live in other parts of the country. And so we need to inject that. This is something that takes time, but we have been proactively doing it over the last 2 years. And we think it's fundamental to building trust, because at the end of the day, our hypothesis is if one, as a viewer or as an audience member, is watching our news and our programs, and they see the issues that resonate with them or are impacting them, they are more likely to believe that that is trustworthy or that that is authentic.
Can you tell us how far you are along that path? How many of your,
Sure.
how far are you from the 50-50, and how many
Sure.
people do you currently employ who are not from the Beltway, East Coast, West Coast?
Sure. What we have spoken about publicly so far is we gave our number 2 years ago. We were 26% of our employees were people of color. And in the first year, we increased that by 3%. And we'll announce this later this year. We're in a very comparable percent for this year of improvement as well. And the other metrics we're going to be rolling out publicly as well. But we've committed to be very transparent about this so that we hold ourselves accountable and people hold us accountable as well. But as I always remind people, this takes time to do it the right way and ensure that we continue to hire and attract the very, very best in our industry. It takes time.
Right. Any more questions? Got a question right at the back. There's a microphone coming.
Hi, my name is Toddy Gutner, and I'm a former print journalist when we distinguished.
So we are the dinosaurs.
Yeah, I went to graduate Medill, and it was like you're either print or broadcast, and like that's so dinosaur. I was a journalist for about 20 years in major business publications, Forbes, Business Week, Wall Street Journal, and I have a sadness, a feeling of loss for when news was trusted. I got out of journalism in part because of what I felt was the anger and the fake news and all that, and the citizen reporters and the echo chambers. And I guess you're talking a little bit about how you're trying to gain the trust back through community. Can you speak more, and sort of, if you had a crystal ball, do you think we will ever get to a point where we can go back to trusting the Fourth Estate, which is what you guys are there for?
I think it's a great question, because those of you who didn't see the Edelman Trust Barometer, which is a survey once a year showing what people trust in, might have missed the fact that in the last year something remarkable has happened, which is that trust in media has fallen below trust in banks and other institutions that, of course, were so criticized in the 2008 crisis. I mean, you can call that divine justice if you're a banker, but it shows the scale of challenge that the media faces right now in terms of the trust collapsing.
Thank you for the question. I don't think we have a choice. We have to find a path forward, because as I alluded to before, the vital role that a strong, independent, and trusted news media plays in a democracy is fundamental. This is a personal thing for me. My parents are immigrants here to the U.S. My mom came from Cuba in the early 60s, left when Fidel Castro sort of solidified his power on the island, and closed down all institutions. And so when I grew up in Miami, among a diaspora that knew firsthand that in one generation you could lose what they had. And I grew up with a very healthy understanding and respect for the role that a strong independent media played. And so there is no easy answers to what you mentioned. There is no silver bullet. I say this to people all the time. There's a variety of things that have to happen. We are focusing on what we can control, because it is something that the news media is part of, but it transcends the news media as well.
Right. Got a question over here. And you've got the microphone just coming. Perry.
Thank you, Cesar. Thank you, Gillian. Perry Peltz, former NBC reporter. And just to drill down a little bit more on this.
It feels a bit like a town hall, by the way.
Yeah, exactly. To drill down on this trust issue, I'm wondering, Cesar, from a practical matter, every day, it used to be that we'd go out and collect the facts and tell the story. How much is busting or combusting fake news and building trust a part of the actual equation when you are out there telling these stories?
Well, I mean, I'm glad you mentioned, Perry, the work of the journalists. So for so many people who are in this room, and this is where my blood boils when you hear some people who are not in the industry and question the rigor of some of our teams. The incredible work, standards, and courage in many cases that we've seen particularly over the last few years in your colleagues and your colleagues here in the United States and abroad. It is, we know the work and that goes into ensuring that our profession and the journalism that we put out is of the highest caliber. And so that does not change. What I do get frustrated about is our journalists are now having to deal with issues that they didn't have to deal with. We are now having to employ security processes, security approaches that we used to use outside of the United States. We have to use them for some of our journalists who are doing coverage here in the United States.
What does that mean? You have bodyguards of people covering the White House?
We have, when our journalists go out to cover certain events, they do have to have.
Which kind of events?
All types of live events covering.
What, political rallies or?
Political rallies and others. There is a point, I mean, we're at a point where our journalists are being confronted, and just for being part of the media. And that is not something that
So let's get specific.
Acceptable.
If you're sending your team out to cover a Trump rally or a Proud Boys rally or something like that, would you now provide them with bodyguards?
There are different types of events that our teams are going out to cover, and our security teams with our producers will evaluate, and if they believe that there is something that they need to provide, they will get the proper training and we'll provide it. But they all have the proper training now.
Wow. That sparked a lot of questions. By the way, before we quickly show the questions, does news about Trump still attract eyeballs with your audience? Because, of course, the terrible irony of the Trump years was that many people in the media, loved to hate Trump on air elsewhere, and yet it drove ratings. Does it still drive ratings?
I don't know if it. There's so many issues right now, Gillian. I mean, we have the January 6th hearings. That's getting big audiences. So I think that's one element. But the economic crisis right now is top of mind for folks, and we're getting record ratings on CNBC, and when we talk about that, and when we've been through different points of the health crisis, people were hungry for information, accurate information. We were getting record audiences coming to all of our platforms, not just the linear TV, but our streaming platforms, looking for accurate information about the health crisis. So, the answer to your question is, I think we're living at a point where we have all of these complexity of events that are all happening at once. And I think audiences are hungry for accurate information about these things. So
right.
It's not just one event.
Well, we have a lot of questions. I'm going to take 2 or 3 of them. Got one there, gentleman green, and then I'll try and do a quick circle. You and then you. Why don't we try and get 3 of them together? And we've literally only got about 4 minutes, so very quickly. Yeah.
Gene Swanson's my name. I'm not a journalist. I'm a retired physician.
Nice to meet you, Gene.
It seems that in my 80 years of life, we've seen tremendous transitions to 24-hour news coverage. Everything seems to be breaking news, which is not really breaking news. And it doesn't seem to me that there's enough active news that really warrants 24 hours, which leads to a lot of perspective and analysis on almost all of the news programs. I'd be interested in how much percentage is perspective and analysis in some of your varying programs.
Interesting question. And then we'll take the question over there as well, because I say we're getting close to time. Since it's like a TV show, I have to hit it out on time.
Sure, I'll just ask the question. Super proud of Cesar because, of course, he's a Henry Crown Fellow and in our class. But I want to say this. Is it command and control? It seems like all of the major networks packed up their bags in Ukraine at about the same time. Was that a mutually agreed upon decision? Was it an individual decision? How do you make those decisions? And what do you think about how it affects the perception of what's happening in our world in terms of consumers?
Yeah, thanks Maya. First on the question of how much perspective and the like. Very specifically, within our portfolio, it is a minority of what we do. We have no perspective or analysis on NBC News, on Telemundo News, on CNBC, on NBC News Now, and on Msnbc, which is the only platform we offer perspective. We only offer it in the mornings and in the evenings. There are, people often talk about the 24-hour news networks. I always try to remind people that they exist, but there's other platforms that generate a tremendous more volume on the digital space of people seeking out perspectives. So most people are finding the perspective information in the digital platforms. On the question of Ukraine, look, we believe this is a war that is the most important war in our generation. It's going to have geopolitical ramifications. We beyond all of us, we believe this is the most important issue we are covering and have to cover outside of the United States. We have committed, a tremendous amount of resources to it. We had a humongous footprint there early on. Many of the people inside and some people on the borders of Poland and some of the other countries. As the war evolved, and it was a very different war, and I'm sorry we don't have time to talk about it, but it was a very different war than in the past. For security reasons, we did have to move people around the country. As we have seen, a few months pass, our footprint of what we are doing in Ukraine has not changed. What you are seeing is the interest of what people want to consume here in the United States has shifted. And so we continue to be on the ground and generate content. But there's no doubt that, after, 3-4+ months, the fact that the economy and inflation, that is top of mind for people. That has shifted. But please know, in our particular case, this is a generational topic, and we are committed to staying there in the long term. And we hope that many of our peers, and we know many of our peers, are going to continue to be there as well.
Well, thank you. Well, thank you for great content. The audience has almost entirely stayed watching until the very end. So I take that as a great vote of confidence, if not ratings. And I think it's also a sign that we all in the room know that the media matters enormously. Many of us have worked in it. Many of us are deeply concerned about it and are becoming more concerned. So I think collectively, we'd just like to say to you, good luck in figuring this out. Thank you.
Thank you.